Picture speaks 1,000 words, doesn't it? A single bullet now has to account for the remaining 7 wounds in Kennedy and Connally. But rather than admit to a conspiracy or investigate further, the Warren Commission chose to endorse the theory put forth by an ambitious junior counselor, Arlen Specter, one of the grossest lies ever forced on the American people. We've come to know it as the magic bullet theory.
Wow, that's quite an indictment. When Oliver Stone's JFK first came out, I saw it 3 times in 5 days. I was mesmerized by it. And I still think it's a conspiratorial masterpiece, a really well-made film. Unfortunately, most everything in there that I thought was a fact is just a pack of lies. And the biggest among these, the most successful, is the idea that it would have taken a so-called magic bullet to hit both Kennedy and Connally.
The magic bullet enters the president's back, headed downward at an angle of 17 degrees. It then moves upward in order to leave Kennedy's body from the front of his neck, wound number 2, where it waits 1.6 seconds, presumably in midair, where it turns right, then left, right, then left, and continues into Connally's body at the rear of his right armpit, wound number 3. The bullet then heads downward at an angle of 27 degrees, shattering Connally's 5th rib and exiting from the right side of his chest, wound number 4. The bullet then turns right and re-enters Connally's body at his right wrist, wound number 5. Shattering the radius bone, the bullet then exits Connally's wrist, wound number 6, makes a dramatic U-turn and buries itself into Connally's left thigh, wound number 7, from which it later falls out and is found in almost pristine condition on a stretcher in a corridor of Parkland Hospital. That's some bullet. Anyone who's been in combat will tell you never in the history of gunfire has there been a bullet this ridiculous.
I would agree that there never has been a bullet so ridiculous. But that's because conspiracists made it up. In truth, almost everything that was presented here is a lie. To begin with, Oliver Stone chooses to follow conspiracy books that have come before him and use this very false graphic that depicts Governor Connally seated directly in front of President Kennedy. In fact, in that vehicle, it's impossible to sit directly in front of a person who's sitting up against the side of the vehicle the way Kennedy was. The governor was in a pull-down jump seat about a half a foot in and lower than the president. Additionally, the orientation of Elm Street is curving away and down from the school book depository and the sniper's nest. So the entire orientation of this shot is wrong. The bullet doesn't come in at this dramatic angle and then have to go up to get out of the president's throat. The president is already going downhill. So when it comes in his back, it's going to come out his throat. And the only thing directly in front of its path is Governor Connally. Additionally, the governor is not seated straight forward. He's looking around to see where the first gunshot came from. This is a perfectly straight shot. When you orientate the people correctly, there's no need for the bullet to twist and turn right and left in the air. There's no need for the bullet to hover for 1 point whatever seconds. It's just made up. There's another problem here for the conspiracists. The governor's wounds, the wound to his back and the exit wound through his chest, were oval in shape, not a circle. That means that the bullet wasn't traveling in a perfectly straight line. It was beginning to roll end over end. Now this happens when a bullet goes through an object, like a human body, and comes out the other side. Its path starts to distort. So if you want to believe, as the conspiracists maintain, that the governor was hit by a separate bullet fired from a separate gun, then you have to believe that that gun majorly malfunctioned and somehow sent the bullet out end over end from the start. So why do the conspiracy researchers who spend decades looking at this stuff somehow miss the fact that it's a straight shot? Why, with all the money that Oliver Stone had to spend on this film and all the research that he allegedly did, Did he overlook this fact? Of course not. He chose to lie about it. And that's my big problem with the conspiracists, is they lie. They just simply make up things that aren't there. And then they say, well, see how impossible this is? It would take a magic bullet. And there are no magic bullets, so there was a conspiracy. Well, there are no magic bullets, but that's because you're lying about it. According to Stone's version, there were not 3 shots that day. There were at least 6. And this is how he describes the 6th and final fatal headshot.
The 6th and fatal shot, frame 313, takes Kennedy in the head from the front. This is the key shot. The president going back and to his left. Shot from the front and right. Totally inconsistent with the shot from the depository.
Was this totally inconsistent with the shot from the school book depository? Well, obviously, my eyes don't lie, right? He goes back and to the left, right?
Back and to the left. Back and to the left. Back and to the left.
The problem here is that our eyes alone don't tell us everything we need to know. It's like one of those optical illusions where 2 objects appear to be 2 different sizes, but when you measure them, they're the same size. And no matter how much you know that they're the same size, you can't stop your eyes from telling you that they're 2 different sizes. What's happening in the Zapruder film isn't exactly an optical illusion, but it plays on our assumptions about how things should work. Part of those assumptions are set up by Hollywood. How many times have you seen somebody in a film get shot and they go flying dramatically? That doesn't happen in real life. Unless you're dealing with a heavy caliber machine gun, people don't get blown away like that. A tiny little bullet makes a tiny little impact. Now, it can kill you, especially if it hits you in the head, but it doesn't move a big body much. And contrary to what Stone says, if you look at the Zapruder film up close in slow motion, you can see that the president's head is sitting relatively upright before it is hit. And then it moves slightly forward. Only slightly, because actual bullets in the real world are only going to move ahead slightly. Furthermore, look at the blood splatter. It's not going behind the president. It's not spraying out towards the back of the car. It's shooting forward. This is completely consistent with a shot from behind. Completely consistent with a shot from the school book depository. So why does the president go back and to the left? Well, there are a couple of things. One is that kind of massive brain trauma is going to make your muscles seize up. And your back muscles are a lot stronger than your stomach muscles, so which direction are you going to go? Back. Another thing is that Kennedy had a bad back, so he wore a brace, which is kind of keeping him in this odd range of motion where he can't really bend very good forward. Once again, with all the research hours that Oliver Stone put into this film, and that all the other conspiracists have put into their work, why don't they know these simple facts? I would maintain that they do know them, they just choose to ignore it. They try to imagine it away, or they just say, I don't care. But they choose to embrace a lie.
5 inches across.
Not one of the civilian doctors who examined the president at Parkland Hospital regarded his throat wound as anything but a wound of entry. But then the body was illegally moved to Washington for the autopsy. Because when a coup d'etat occurred, there's a big difference between an autopsy that is performed by civilian doctors and one that is performed by military doctors under orders. The departure of Air Force One from Love Field that Friday afternoon was not so much a takeoff as it was a getaway.
So there are several accusations going on here. First of all, yes, it's true. The Parkland doctors thought that the president had been shot from the front. But they didn't examine him. They were trying to save his life. As hopeless as it was, they were trying to get his heart going. They were trying to get fluids in him. They went through the wound that he already had to make a tracheotomy tube. They were doing anything they could to try to keep him alive. And for a little bit, they at least kept his heart going. And then they finally called it. But this was not an examination. Now, it is true that the body was taken away from Texas, and that violates Texas law. But the way that Stone presents it, as this shadowy forces, unnamed people around the coffin that just push their way through as this one valiant man tries to stop them, it's ridiculous. In reality, that one man was a local coroner, Earl Rose, who was a total jerk. Everybody else was devastated by what had happened to the president. But Rose was just saying, just another body to me. We have to do an autopsy. When they pleaded with him, can't we let the president's widow go home? Why do we have to make her sit here and suffer? He said, I deal with widows every day. He's one of those guys that, God of his little world, and gets off on that power. His attitude that day was just disgusting. They spent more than an hour with Rose, arguing with him, pleading with him to understand the situation and how unique it was. In the end, they got Rose to admit that a judge could be brought in and overrule him. So they went and got a judge and brought him in. But the judge was too timid to overrule Rose. It was at this point that Kenneth O'Donnell, one of John and Bobby Kennedy's best friends, couldn't take it anymore. When the judge said an autopsy would only take 3 hours or so, O'Donnell looked at him and said, go fuck yourself. We're not staying 3 hours or 3 minutes. And that is the point at which they pushed the coffin out. Now, if you're crazy enough to believe in a conspiracy, you're probably crazy enough to believe that O'Donnell was in on it. But if you watch the movie 13 Days, where Kevin Costner actually plays O'Donnell, you'll get a fairly good representation of how close he was to the Kennedys. This is the absolute last person who would be involved in a conspiracy. He did what he did out of respect to the president's widow. He just wanted to get Jackie and the body back to Washington. There was nothing nefarious about it, and there was nothing rushed about it. Stone also gets it very wrong in the way that he depicts the actual autopsy.
That's enough. That's enough. Here's duly noted.
Okay, let's check the back, gentlemen.
All right,
There's a considerable amount of spinal fluid coming in right here.
okay.
I can feel it at the end of the wound with my finger.
That won't be necessary, Commander. Watch the ear, watch the ear. Yes, sir.
Shot in the back. Crying.
He said,
Who's in charge here?
I am.
In reality, it just wasn't anything like this. The 3 doctors who did the autopsy did a very diligent job. They x-rayed the entire body, and they even called down to Parkland to talk to the doctors there. It was then, and only then, that they found out the wound in the neck was not from a tracheotomy, but was from a bullet that then they used for a tracheotomy. That was the point at which they realized that there wasn't a bullet hiding in the president's body. It had gone from the back out the neck. Like the so-called magic bullet, like the allegedly obvious shot from the front, it's just all made up.
Forget about your combat troops. He told McNamara he is going to pull out the goddamned advisors.
So why is it that Stone believes there was a conspiracy to kill Kennedy? Well, he claims that the military-industrial complex made a big profit off the Vietnam War, and they wouldn't have had that war if Kennedy had stayed in office. But there's no proof one way or the other as to what Kennedy would have done in Vietnam. There's no proof that he had made up his mind on it. At the beginning of Stone's film, he shows an interview with Walter Cronkite and John Kennedy, and he plays just a little piece of it.
We've got our difficulties there, quite obviously.
Unless a greater effort is made by the government to win popular support, I don't think that the war can be won out there. In the final analysis, it's their war. They're the ones who have to win it or lose it.
Even if this was the only thing he had ever said on the matter, it wouldn't be conclusive proof of what he was going to do. But there's more to that interview, which Stone completely ignores, including this.
But I don't agree with those who say we should withdraw. That'd be a great mistake.
Of course, that doesn't fit with the story that Stone is telling, so why bother to mention it? Instead, he just blazes forward, assuming that he's right, and assuming that Kennedy was going to pull out of Vietnam. Imagine this clandestine group of people sitting around talking about maybe we should get rid of the president. Now, if you've actually ever spoken to people in the military or law enforcement at the federal level, the idea that any of them would go along with this is absurd. But let's just pretend. Let's live in Oliver Stone's world. So they're sitting around at this smoky meeting and they're saying, I know, let's kill the president. Well, how are we going to do that? We could poison his food. He's got a lot of health problems. So it would just look like he died. But then somebody stands up and says, no, I've got a better idea. Let's shoot him in a public place with hundreds of people around, with still cameras, movie cameras, and possibly even TV video cameras, maybe even shooting live. And we'll have multiple shooters firing from different locations, but we'll pin it all on one guy, which means we'll have to fake the autopsy and we'll have to get the body out of there before anybody looks at it. And we'll have to collect all the film footage before any of it gets on the air, even though some of it might go out live. And all of our guys have to get away successfully. And of course, they got to get paid, which adds a whole level of bureaucracy to make this happen. I mean, can you imagine somebody saying that and everybody else in the room going, yeah, that sounds like a really good idea.
Just get me elected. I'll give you a damn war.
It's very clear the way Stone views Johnson and the way he wants his viewers to view Johnson. But Stone knows, as anybody who has looked at the history knows, that Johnson was devastated by the Vietnam War and his inability to figure out what to do, to go in deeper, to pull out, to be the first American president to lose a war. There were so many factors coming down on him that when he was up for re-election, he decided, despite all of his ambition, not to run.
With American sons in the field far away, with America's future under challenge right here at home, with our hopes and the world's hopes for peace and the balance every day, I do not believe that I should devote an hour or a day of my time to any personal partisan causes or to any duties other than the awesome duties of this office, the presidency of your country. Accordingly, I shall not seek and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
Now, does this sound like a man whose only goal is to be president, who would kill the president just to get the job and then give it up? The conspiracist view of Johnson is much like their view of everything. Way out of whack. Not at all in line with history or the lessons it has to teach us. You just can't take it seriously. Once you see that there is a pattern of lie after lie after lie, misrepresentation after misrepresentation, once you see that everything the conspiracists accuse the government of is what they're doing, there's just no point in listening to them anymore.